Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the strangest forms of entertainment the ancient world offered, the Roman Colosseum. But instead of heroic battles or fair competitions, we will talk about the ridiculous, uneven, and often completely unfair matchups that took place there. Because in ancient Rome, being part of the games didn't mean you were skilled. It just meant you were available. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is there. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy journey from all over the world. Now turn off the lights, switch on a soft fan if you enjoy a slight background hum, and let's gently drift into tonight's journey. We begin in the heart of one of the most iconic structures of ancient Rome, the Colosseum. The stands are packed with roaring spectators, and you're standing in the arena wondering how you ended up here. You're not a warrior, you have no armor, and clearly you didn't volunteer. But for some reason, debt, punishment, or maybe just bad luck, you've been brought out as part of the entertainment. In the Colosseum, fairness wasn't always the goal. Some matches had ordinary citizens pitted against trained soldiers. Sometimes people were forced to fight wild animals with nothing but a stick. On certain days, entire mythological stories were reenacted, with participants assigned roles they had no idea about. Many matches were designed purely for spectacle. It might be a squad of armored fighters battling a few people who'd never held a weapon, or one unfortunate soul trying to survive against a massive beast. And sometimes it was simply a public execution dressed up with costumes to resemble a historical drama. Everything was scripted except for the feelings of the ones thrown into the show. And don't think that everyone was an enslaved person or criminal. Some people actually volunteered. They signed up for the prize money, the glory, or simply because they believed they had a chance. They received better training and gear, but the risk was still real because there was no guarantee that your opponent would fight fairly or follow any rules. What about the audience? They came to watch. They cheered for the drama. They didn't demand fairness. They demanded a good show. If a match ended too quickly, they'd boo. If it dragged on without a result, they'd grow bored. And if a fighter survived but wasn't entertaining enough, they might demand a redo. And so many were sent back out, injured, exhausted, barely able to stand. Some days started with soldier battles in the morning, executions at noon, and historical or mythological recreations by afternoon. A perfectly scheduled lineup, unless the emperor decided to shake things up at the last minute. The people running these shows were called editors, not editors of books, but officials who sponsored the games. They used the events to gain favor, boost their reputation, or flaunt their power. The more lavish and expensive the show, the more points they scored with the crowd. And those inside the arena, they were just part of the performance. If you were lucky, you got weapons and armor. If not, you were the moving target for someone else's practice round. If you got hurt but survived, you were dragged out and brought back the next day. If you died, you were carted off in a wooden wagon, and the arena was quickly cleaned for the next match. Everything happened fast and efficiently. There wasn't much time for mourning. And if you thought being skilled was enough to survive, think again. Many fights were decided before they even began. Winners were often chosen based on the emperor's mood or the crowd's reaction, not actual talent. Some fighters won 10 matches in a row, only to slip once, and it was all over. Meanwhile, others who had never fought before were hailed as heroes because they stirred emotions even if their stories ended badly. But do you know what's strange? Some people still wanted to join because they loved the thrill. Because they had nothing left to lose. Because it was the only shot at being seen in a society that otherwise ignored them. And that is the great paradox of the Roman arena. A brutal and magnetic place, a stage of executions, and a forge of legends. And tonight, you've only just stepped into the story's beginning. And that was just the beginning. Because if you thought facing another human was terrifying, wait until you look across the arena and see a tiger unchained and hungry, staring straight at you. Up next, the beast matches. Brutal, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying in their own right. Nothing wakes you faster than stepping into an arena, looking across, and seeing a tiger growling at you. No chains, no fences, just you, a thin tunic, and thousands of spectators cheering like they're about to watch something fun. Welcome to the Roman midday special Venazione. Battles between humans and wild beasts. This was a key part of arena entertainment. In the morning came the gladiator fights. By noon, when the sun was high and the audience sleepy from overeating, organizers would wake things up by releasing wild animals into the arena if someone had just returned from Africa with an exotic souvenir. Tigers, lions, leopards, bears, even rhinos or hippos. And who faced these beasts? Not trained soldiers, not professional hunters. Usually it was people sentenced to death or enslaved people being punished. They had no armor, no proper weapons. Sometimes they were given only a stick or a flimsy wooden shield, good for maybe blocking one pounce before snapping in two. Sometimes these fights were staged as theatrical performances. You weren't just prey, you had a role. Maybe you were cast as a hunter but handed a blunt spear. Or perhaps you were playing a character from mythology, like Acton torn apart by dogs, or a soldier eaten by beasts for offending the gods. The storyline might be grand, but the actor was real, and so was the beast. You might wonder, where did they get so many tigers? The Roman Empire was massive. They imported animals with large predators from Africa, Asia Minor, and anywhere else. These animals were caged, shipped by boat, sometimes for weeks, and brought into the Colosseum's underground cells. Romans called them bestiae, wild beasts. For them, it was a key part of the entertainment experience. And oddly, they sometimes claimed it was educational. They said watching men fight wild animals taught the public lessons about bravery, about the fairness of justice, or about how breaking the law means severe punishment. But really, it was cruelty packaged as spectacle, a way to make the crowd cheer, laugh, and then return to lunch as if they just watched a game. And if you're thinking, well, at least it was only for criminals, think again. Sometimes even innocent people were dragged into these shows, maybe due to a paperwork error. Perhaps you were a slave owned by a harsh master. Or maybe you owed money and someone figured it'd be easier if you disappeared dramatically. Of course, the animals didn't always follow the plan. Sometimes the tiger wasn't interested in the person at all. It would lie down, yawn, or run a lap and hide in a corner. When that happened, the organizers clapped, and animal trainers used whips, fire, or shouting to force it back into its role. If that failed, the match paused, and the condemned was taken away to wait for next time. Other times, the animal overperformed. It might leap over barriers, climb near the stands, or turn on its trainer. A leopard caused such chaos one year that the entire event was cancelled. The crowd was asked to leave, while guards tried to lure it back underground using a chunk of raw meat on a rope. Oddly enough, some animals even got promoted. If they survived many matches, they might be kept to train new beasts. Some were given names and better food and treated like arena celebrities. Of course, those were rare. After a few appearances, most collapsed, just like the humans forced to face them. What about the survivors? You might be pardoned if you're lucky enough to live through a beast fight. The crowd would cheer, the emperor might gesture for mercy, and you'd leave the arena battered but alive. That was considered a victory, even if you never wanted to fight in the first place. Honestly, surviving was a miracle, because in the Roman arena, not everyone who entered was a warrior. Many were just material for the show. Whether criminal, enslaved person, or unwilling victim, they became part of a game with no fairness. A game with roles, music, and a cheering crowd, none of whom cared about your fate. And that was just the best fights. Tomorrow we'll step into another kind of battle. One where your opponent isn't a lion, but another human under equally bizarre circumstances. After the battles between men and beasts, once the audience had clapped their hands sore, eaten their fill, and begun to grow drowsy, the Roman arena shifted into its intermission. But don't imagine this was a time for rest or snacks. In the Roman world, intermission meant executions. It sounds grim, but this was an official part of the program for the Romans. Right after the first bouts, criminals were brought into the arena midday. Not for trial, but for public execution before thousands seeking midday entertainment. And they didn't do it. It wasn't just a quick act. The Romans had an entire arsenal of ideas to turn executions into theatre. They called these performances damnio ad bestius, condemnation to be devoured by beasts, or sometimes damnio ad lardium, condemnation to be killed by the sword. Depending on the creativity of the organizers, you might be cast as a mythological character, or simply victim number 3. For example, one convict might be forced to play Prometheus, chained to a rock in the arena as an eagle was released to perform the role. Another might portray a rebel from Roman mythology dragged across the arena by a chariot. Each role came with props, crude costumes, and ended in real death. No special effects, no stunt doubles. Everything was real. And the audience kept eating grapes, sipping wine, chatting casually. Some executions were even more elaborate. On occasion, a whole miniature stage was constructed right in the arena. Ancient writers recorded that they once witnessed an execution staged as a 3-act tragedy, each act featuring a different form of death. The crowd was invited to watch as if attending a play, except the lead actor never returned from backstage. Why did the Romans do this? The simple answer: they saw it as public education. Criminals were exposed, enemies of the state were punished before the masses. It was both a warning and a form of entertainment. Everyone understood if you betrayed, rebelled, or broke the law, you wouldn't just be executed, you'd be executed with a script. And of course, not everyone in the arena was truly guilty. Some were condemned for unpaid debts. Others were simply runaway slaves. Some were prisoners of war. To Roman authorities, they were tools to send a message. To the audience, they were the next act. Once prisoners were forced to reenact a famous battle between rebels and Roman troops. The prisoners played the rebels, unarmed, unarmored, while real soldiers played the soldiers. The result was predictable, but the crowd cheered wildly. No one cared that real people were falling, and when the fake battle ended, soldiers collected the bodies, cleaned the sand, and prepped for the next match as if nothing had happened. However, sometimes the crowd wasn't satisfied. If a performance ended too quickly, if the condemned didn't react properly, the audience booed. They wanted drama. They wanted a climax. A quiet death without screams or blood was considered too dull. In such cases, the organizers took notes to improve the next time. Some people did survive, not many, but a few. If someone was thrown into the arena, fought a beast or an opponent, and lived. And if the crowd liked it, they might be spared. This was called gratia, a pardon, often granted by the emperor or a high official. But sometimes survival depended on the crowd's applause. The louder the cheer, the better your chances. Of course, the crowd wasn't always unanimous. Sometimes one group shouted for mercy, another chanted, "Kill him." The Romans took the collective opinion very seriously, and so a person's fate could change in seconds based on the emotions of strangers. That alone is chilling. Imagine yourself standing in that arena. The sun was beating down, sweat on your back. Your hands are empty. Armed soldiers are in front of you, a roaring crowd on all sides. You don't know if you'll live or die. Everything depends on the spectators. No lawyer, no trial, just heat, sand, and drums announcing begin. That was the reality for thousands who stepped into the arena. And that was only midday. Later in the day, the real gladiator matches would begin. Fighters who were trained, experienced, famous, and some brand new, just hoping to survive their very first fight. But things didn't stop at wild beasts. Just when the blood dried and the sand was brushed smooth, the Romans brought out something even more unpredictable: the condemned criminals, and the punishments awaiting them. Let's just say not all of them involved a sword. After the dramatic intermission, once the arena floor had been cleared, the bloodstains covered with sand to make things less unpleasant, and the crowd had nibbled a few more grapes, the real show began. The battles between professional gladiators, or at least those who looked professional. But you know what? Not everyone who was called a gladiator was ready to fight. Many were pushed into the arena without proper training, unfamiliar with their weapons, or even still unsure of what was happening. And so the audience often witnessed something not listed on the program: a battle between a seasoned veteran and someone who had picked up a sword for the first time that morning. This happened quite often during large-scale games. Gladiators, also known as gladiators, were typically selected from prisoners of war, enslaved people, or poor men who signed up hoping to change their fortunes. They were brought to a ludas, a training school. There they learned how to fight, keep balance, handle weapons, and most importantly, survive more than 10 minutes in the arena. However, because of the unrelenting demand for entertainment, matches were frequent, almost constant, meaning many were sent out before finishing their third lesson. Some had only learned to hold a shield and were thrown into combat with someone who had already won 5 matches. Some still fainted at the sight of blood and had to step into the giant arena under the gaze of thousands who were eager to see blood spill as quickly as possible. These newcomers were often called TI first-timers. To the crowd, they were wild cards. To their opponents, they were easy wins. To the organizers, they were expendable extras. The sad part is that even the rookies were dressed like professionals. They wore the outfits, the armor, the helmets. They looked ready. But many didn't even know how to hold their weapon correctly. And the audience didn't know, or if they did, they didn't care. In some matches, rookies were pitted against veteran fighters with many wins. These were crowd favorites with their signature styles. Some specialized in curved swords, others in nets and trident. The crowd had once spared some due to their popularity, and now facing them was a 19-year-old boy, never been in combat, clutching his shield like a food tray. Records show matches that lasted just 30 seconds. The rookie stepped out, looked around, and he was down before he realized the match had begun. Not because he was weak, but because he had no idea what to do. The fight ended. The crowd applauded. The veteran raised his hand. The rookie was dragged off. Of course, not all ended in disaster. Some newcomers pulled off the unexpected. A few were strong, quick to react, or just plain lucky. They dodged the first strike, countered by instinct, and somehow turned the fight around. And the crowd loved a good upset. When that happens, the Tiro might be promoted to Novitius, who is a promising newcomer, survive a few more matches, and he'd get a real name, a title, and maybe even fans. But truth be told, most never made it that far. Just imagine it. An arena where the crowd roars non-stop, the ground is soaked in sun and blood, the air thick with heat and drum beats. Is that really where you want your first ever fight? Yet many had no choice, no preparation, just one command. Enter the arena, fight, keep the crowd entertained. Some tried to learn as fast as possible, training at night, practicing breathing and watching others move, repeating the trainer's shouts from the day before. Don't turn your back, keep your left hand high. But once in the ring, everything moved fast, and sometimes there was no second chance. A few were lucky enough to face merciful opponents. Some older and more experienced veterans knew what it was like to be new. They fought gently, held back, gave the rookie time to find his footing. Some faked injuries to stretch out the match and make it interesting for the crowd. Some even whispered advice mid-battle. Don't expose your right side, stay low. Even so, most fights ended the same. The rookie lost, but he might be spared if he showed good spirit, courage, or didn't run. Because in the arena, sometimes surviving was a victory. In the next part, we'll explore the strangest matches ever held, where fighters didn't just wield swords and shields, but wore mythical costumes and acted out legends, even if they had no idea what the story was. One of the most curious and slightly absurd aspects of the Roman arena was that sometimes people who had no reason to fight volunteered to enter. And no, they weren't enslaved, they weren't criminals, and they weren't even professional soldiers. They were nobles, you heard that right. Occasionally, the wealthy, the children of powerful families, even royal relatives suddenly decided they wanted to try being gladiators. Why? Simply because they wanted attention. In Roman times, gladiators were adored by the public, not unlike celebrities today. Some had their songs, painted portraits, and even graffiti tributes scrolled across city walls. So certain upper-class members thought, why not give it a shot? Can't be that hard. I've got money. I can hire the best trainers, and if I win, my name will spread throughout Rome. Sounds reasonable, until they stepped into the arena. Imagine being a gentleman used to silk robes and horses held for you by servants, never having a weapon heavier than a silver spoon at dinner. Then suddenly you're handed an iron breastplate heavier than your writing desk. And across from you stands a gladiator who survived 12 matches. At that moment, the real experience loses its charm. Some nobles were genuinely trained. They built private arenas, hired instructors from top schools, and spent weeks in character. They practiced slashing, dodging, shouting their name heroically before striking. But the arena wasn't a training hall. There was no one yelling cut and no padded floor. It was a real fight once the iron gate slammed shut and the drums began to beat. No props, no stand-ins, and no one will whisper your lines if you forget. A famous case was Quintus, son of a wealthy nobleman from Naples. He decided to shock everyone for his birthday by signing up for a real match. He trained for 2 weeks, commissioned custom armor, and even brought musicians to play him into the arena. The result, the match lasted all of 2 minutes. His opponent, a man who had survived even a mock naval battle, spun once, and Quintus was flat on the ground, gasping for breath. Fortunately, he was only lightly injured and was carried off to a mix of pitying and mocking applause. Of course, not all noblemen were hopeless. Some were genuinely skilled, having served in the military or been athletic since childhood. A few even became victorious gladiators, known in history as patrician gladiators. But they were rare and most faced heavy criticism from their social class. Because in Roman tradition, gladiators were of low status. They were entertainers, not gentlemen. When a noble stepped into the arena, it was seen by many as a disgrace to the family's honor. There were even senators forced to resign for participating in public matches. The irony, no matter how rich you were, once you entered the arena, you were treated like every other fighter. You wore the standard gear. You bowed to the emperor. You waited for the signal to begin. And if you were injured, you didn't get to your physician. Some noblemen broke bones and had to lie on the sand, waiting for standard processing like everyone else. The glory might be real, but the cost was uncomfortable at best. Some aristocrats tried to get the feel without the pain. So they arranged mock duels with wooden weapons or dulled blades. These weren't public, just private shows for friends or exclusive guests. Think of it as light, immersive experiences. But to bloodthirsty Romans who valued realism, these shows were a joke. The ancient version of the press graffiti scribes left scathing reviews like that noble waved his sword like a dancing fan, or his blade didn't cut anyone except Rome's pride. In short, when nobles entered the arena, all eyes were on them. If they performed well, they were celebrated. If not, they became a laughingstock. Either way, the protective shield of wealth and status was stripped away because in the arena, you were no longer a lord or lady. You were just a name on a list, and if you weren't careful, that name could be crossed out in minutes. And just when you think you've seen it all, Rome throws another twist. Because what's more terrifying than watching someone punished in front of a crowd? Being forced to play the villain in a twisted, scripted execution. Yes. Up next, theatrical executions, where myth meets blood and the ending is never in your favor. After the matches with gladiators, wild beasts, and the occasional noble who fancied a challenge, the organizers of Roman arena spectacles still weren't satisfied. They constantly sought ways to make everything bigger, stranger, and unpredictable. And so one day they decided to bring an entire forest into the city's heart. Yes, you heard that right. There was an occasion when the Colosseum was transformed into a miniature forest with real trees, soil, and even birds fluttering through the air. All of it staged to create a vivid setting for memorable matches known as Sylve battles in the woods. The concept was simple: recreate scenes of combat in the wild. But execution was far more complicated. Trees had to be transported from outside the city. Hills were built, streams dug, and thicket arranged. And hidden among all of it were wild animals and human combatants. This wasn't just a fight anymore, it was a full-blown production with storylines and scenery. A live-action blockbuster without a director, without special effects, and no guarantees that you'd make it through to the second act. And who were the stars of this play? As usual, it was the condemned and the low-tier gladiators. They were given a brief plot like, "You're a jungle survivor being hunted by beasts," then handed a blunt spear and sent him in with a good luck. Inside the forest might be lions, bears, or tigers. There might be soldiers dressed as native hunters lying in ambush. There might be traps, pitfall holes, or fake fires and smoke machines of the ancient world. Everything was designed to make the spectators feel like they were watching a real story. Of course, the audience sat comfortably in the shade, snacking and sipping wine, laughing whenever someone tripped or screamed. Meanwhile, those inside the forest had to duck between trees, panting in fear, and often had no idea what was happening. And it didn't stop there. Some matches even had soundtracks. A small Roman band was stationed beneath the stands, playing drums and horns during dramatic moments. When a bear appeared, the music would swell. When a fighter ran for his life, the drums quickened. And when someone fell, a trumpet blast signaled the scene's tragic conclusion. To the crowd, it was living art. To those on the ground, it was a nightmare. Once one of these jungle scenarios went on for 3 hours. Decorative wooden stakes injured several people. Others broke bones due to unstable terrain laid hastily across the arena floor. Some animals even wandered into the spectator section, causing brief chaos before being herded back underground. Still, the Silvii matches continued. Why? Because the crowd loved them. They didn't come to the Colosseum just for blood. They wanted immersion. They wanted a wild adventure in the middle of Rome without leaving their seats. And if turning the Colosseum into a forest wasn't impressive enough, wait for what came next. When the Romans decided to turn the arena into the sea, that's right, they hosted Namarchi, full-scale naval battles in the middle of dry land. Suppose you thought flooding the arena with a forest was the strangest thing the Romans ever did. Congratulations. In that case, you're about to meet a crazier concept. Naumachie, full-blown naval battles in the middle of dry land. Not miniature reenactments, not toy boats in a tub. Real water, real ships, real people, and real casualties. Picture this. You're seated in the stands of the Colosseum. The weather's perfect, and a light breeze is blowing. Then suddenly the arena, which was covered in sand and blood just yesterday, transforms into a shimmering lake. Yes, the Romans flooded the arena floor by opening underground canals that led in water. It was an engineering marvel, incredibly sophisticated and labor-intensive. But after a few hours of preparation, the hardened ground was transformed into open water, and the ships began to appear from both sides when the drums rolled. Not massive warships, smaller vessels styled after Greek or Carthaginian designs, complete with oars, sails, and crew members playing their assigned roles. You might think, oh, it's just a stage performance, right? Nope. They fought for real. The people cast in these battles were typically prisoners, enslaved people, or disgraced soldiers. They weren't asked for consent. One morning, someone might be shaken awake with the words, "Get up. You're a sailor today." And just like that, you were part of the fleet. Your mission simple: row out, engage the enemy vessel, and try to survive. Each team had dozens of members, rowers, archers, spearmen, and swimmers, just in case the boat went down and someone had to handle the situation. Unlike other arena fights, Namarchi often had historical storylines. One battle might reenact Athens versus Sparta, or a Roman naval fight against Cilician pirates. But even when dressed up in historical fiction, the results were real. Boats capsized, people drowned, and many couldn't swim. There was one year when a single Naumachia lasted nearly 2 hours. During that time, thousands of spectators cheered, laughed, and pointed whenever someone was knocked overboard. Some even brought bread and wine and treated the whole thing like a picnic. The real feat was in the preparation. To stage a naval battle like this, the organizers had to coordinate hundreds of workers, engineers to manage the water system, shipbuilders, trainers, and eventually people to retrieve bodies from the water afterward. Once it was over, the water was drained, the floor restored, and the arena made ready for the next day's show. Expensive, absolutely, but worth it. At least in the eyes of those trying to win the people's favor. The emperor was usually the sponsor. These events were political gifts meant to impress. The grander the spectacle, the longer the show, the more dramatic the special effects, the better. And the common folk, they didn't care where the money came from. They just wanted to see a naval war in the middle of a city. And what about the poor souls acting in it? No one asked if they could row. Someone might have been a blacksmith just the day before. Now they were handed armor, a heavy spear, and told just aim forward and stab. Some fell into the water from exhaustion and never resurfaced. Others tried to board enemy ships, slipped, slammed against the side, and that was the end of their performance. Yet some rose as unexpected heroes. You might be granted your freedom if you rowed well, fought bravely, and survived an Almakia. Some were even accepted into the actual Roman military. A few were cheered by the audience and in rare cases awarded, sometimes with money, sometimes with liberty. But those cases were rare. Most participants appeared only once. Afterward, someone new was chosen. The audience didn't remember names, just that one ship that got rammed and sent water flying. No one cared who was on it. That was the cold truth of the arena. Today you might be a sailor, tomorrow a jungle fighter. The day after, cast as a rebel in a historical reenactment. You didn't need skill or experience to show up. But thankfully, you're here. Not on a boat, not rowing into a fake lake, not holding a spear because someone needed a dramatic ending. All you need to do is lie still, relax, and let the imaginary waters grow calm once more. Gladiators, tigers, naval battles, fake forests. Sounds intense, but sometimes what made the audience laugh, or at least sit up with curiosity, wasn't anything fierce or grand. It was ducks, or more precisely geese. Yes. Among the many bizarre events staged in the Roman Colosseum were shows known as light battles, designed mainly for humor and harmless entertainment. Instead of blood and clashing steel, spectators watched a grown man try to chase or run away from a bunch of very angry geese. And surprisingly, this was a reasonably common act during the side segments of the games. Why geese? Because Roman geese, to put it bluntly, were not pleasant animals. They were large, loud, aggressive, and if you were wearing a gladiator tunic with no shin armor, their beaks were a legitimate threat. The contestants were often lightly punished. Maybe a guard who fell asleep on duty, or an enslaved person who broke a valuable wine jug. They weren't sentenced to death, but they also weren't allowed to sit around. So they were brought into the arena, placed in a circle of sand, and the organizers would release a few hungry geese, sometimes 3, sometimes 10. And to make it more exciting, they'd even tie a bit of fresh greens to the person's belt. So the geese would chase them thinking lunch was running away. It sounds funny, and it was, but it wasn't easy. Geese run fast, turn sharply, and have no sense of choreography. Meanwhile, the person in the arena would spin in place, trying not to fall over, doing their best to avoid a flurry of wings and sharp pecks. And the crowd, they loved it. No blood needed, just laughter. There was nothing like watching a well-dressed Roman gentleman slip on a feather and land flat on his back. It was considered wholesome entertainment, perfect for a calm afternoon or when kids were in the audience. Some versions even took things further. In the advanced goose match, the person might be blindfolded and forced to retrieve an item from the center of the arena while a flock of geese stood guard. Or they might have to balance on a beam while geese tried to peck at their ankles from below. No blood, but plenty of screaming, often louder than during a tiger fight. Organizers sometimes added other animals into the mix to make things even funnier. Roosters, piglets, or rabbits. Not for combat to create complete chaos. A mini petting zoo obstacle course. The punished participant would have to dodge animals, balance carefully, and avoid knocking over a ceramic jar in the middle of the arena. Their final challenge. And if they broke the jar, they had to go again with more geese. For the audience, this was light-hearted relief between the severe bouts, a way to cool off after intense spectacles. It is also a reminder that not every arena performance had to end in blood. For the person in the ring, they were counting the minutes. Many later claimed they'd rather fight a man with a sword than be chased in circles by 3 geese. At least a sword doesn't honk every time you turn your back. Some goose trainers even gained recognition. Specific handlers spent weeks training their birds to follow cues, chase on command, or even act by circling the ring. The Romans loved bizarre human-animal coordination, and if you pulled it off well, you might be rewarded. And your goose, it got extra snacks. There are even wall paintings and graffiti showing these performances. One carving in Pompeii shows a man in a fringed tunic standing stiffly beside two geese wearing tiny hats. The show was a hit. In the end, the Romans knew how to keep things unpredictable, whether it was brutal battles or silly games. And in a society that loved drama and comedy, nothing hit the spot like a flock of furious geese rampaging across the Colosseum floor. So if someone asks, would you rather fight a tiger or a goose? You might need to think longer than you expected. But don't worry, tonight you don't have to choose. There are no geese, no sand circle, no roaring crowds, just soft breathing, a quiet night, and sleep drawing gently near. Back then, if you evaded taxes, the consequences were usually a warning letter, a fine, or at worst, a court summons. But in ancient Rome, you could be dragged straight into the arena. Yes, in that vast empire, paying taxes wasn't just a civic duty, it was also your ticket to not becoming unwilling entertainment. Here's how it worked. The Romans had a comprehensive taxation system. There were professional tax collectors, asset records, ledgers, and paperwork. But not everyone could afford to pay, especially during years of bad harvest or after wars. And when payment wasn't possible, people experiencing poverty were often auctioned off or had their property seized. If you had nothing left, no house, no land, no assets, then the only thing left to give was yourself. At first, you might be assigned to forced labor, hauling water, sweeping streets, or moving stones for construction. But if after a few months you still hadn't paid off your debt, or if the tax collector got impatient, you'd be sent to the last place anyone wanted to go, the Ludus Gladiator, the gladiator training school. Not because you were talented, but because you were cheap. The school master would purchase you from the local authorities with an IOU on record. Then they'd train you for a few weeks, or at least teach you how to stand upright under the sun and throw you into a match at the arena. For every fight you joined, the school got paid. If you survived, they kept investing in you. If not, it was a loss. But no worries. There were always more. There were always more. You once just a potter, grape farmer, or fabric vendor at the market suddenly became an unwilling warrior. On paper, your reason for entering the arena, unpaid tax debt. Some of these people were assigned lighter roles, background extras in staged battles, reenactment performers, or bait for wild animals. But most still had to wield a weapon and fight. Not for glory, but because they owed a few salt tax denarii 2 seasons ago. Some even wrote farewell letters to their families before stepping into the arena. One read, "I'm sorry I couldn't pay last month's taxes. They say, if I hold the sword well, I might be spared. I'll try." Heartbreaking, but true. Still, a few became legends. One bricklayer arrested for tax debt survived 7 matches in the arena. The crowd loved him and nicknamed him the Iron Shovel because he used a shovel to fend off a trident in his first fight. He was eventually granted freedom and became a trainer for new tax debt fighters. But that was the rare exception. Most entered the arena. They fought. They paid with sweat, with wounds, or with their lives. And then their name disappeared from the debt registry because no one was left to pay. What's even more sobering is that the crowd knew all of this. Spectators were often informed about who was about to enter. A 34-year-old man from Ostia arrested for unpaid grain taxes. And still they clapped, they cheered, they roared as if watching a thrilling stage play. No one asked why this man couldn't afford his taxes. No one questioned how a missing payment could lead to a sword fight in a sandy pit. In a society where entertainment matters more than empathy, no one asks. Of course, not everyone was indifferent. Some records describe matches being cancelled due to local protests over a villager being sent to the arena. Some crowds argued that this match isn't fair at all. But those were rare flickers of resistance, fleeting moments of blood, sweat, and shouted excitement in a long history. If you've ever wondered what did ancient Rome do with the poor, part of the answer lies here in the arena where those with nothing left became the bonus segment for the wealthy. And just like that, the debt was erased. But the cost was anything but cheap. Thankfully, you owe no one. You don't have to hold a spear, be called out under the midday sun, or reenact a battle scene because your income dipped this year. And yet, no matter how wild or ridiculous things became, there was always one silent, looming presence that could shift everything in an instant. Because at the center of every decision, every fate sealed or spared, sat the emperor. And when his mood changed, so did the rules of survival. In the Roman arena, you could fight well, dodge swiftly, even survive against all odds. But that didn't guarantee you'd leave the arena alive, because one person mattered more than anyone else. The man seated in the highest chair at the center of the stands, the emperor. And that day, he was bored. It sounds absurd, but it happened more often than you'd think. After hundreds of matches, blood, screams, and dramatic comebacks, the emperor sometimes started feeling numb. And when the emperor got bored, everything could take an unexpected turn. Your fate could be sealed with a nod, or worse, a lazy hand flick. This gave rise to the most famous game of the arena, Polus Verso, the thumbs of life and death. There's a lot of debate about which direction meant what, but one thing was sure. The emperor made the call, and he didn't need a good reason. You might have just won an incredible fight. The crowd cheered wildly, but if the emperor's wine was too bland, or he was still sulking from a boring match earlier, he could point at you and you'd know what that meant. And just like that, victory turned into removed from the afternoon roster. Some emperors treated life and death decisions like personal entertainment, like Commodus, who even stepped into the arena himself for fun. Or Caligula, famously unpredictable, who once spared a loser because he liked the color of his shoes. Others didn't even need to speak. A little applause, a chuckle. That alone could save your life, because sometimes making the emperor laugh was worth more than any precise strike. That's why gladiators started learning to perform. They didn't just fight. They trained to strike with flair, scream on quay when wounded, and fall in dramatic fashion. A perfectly timed roll, a heroic backward collapse. It could win applause from the crowd and amuse the emperor. And as you know, if it pleased the eye, it might spare your life. Sometimes the emperor arrived late or got distracted, leaving someone else to make the call. A minor official snacking on grapes while scanning his debt ledger. And if neither the emperor nor the crowd cared, the default decision was finish him. Sound unfair? It was. On bad weather days, or when the man in the high seat was moody, gladiators entered the arena filled with absolute dread. Not of their opponent, but of the man lounging on silk cushions, resting his chin on one hand. Some prepared two endings, one for a noble death if pointed down, and another for a triumphant pose if spared. Some hid their lucky charms in their sandals. Some wrote farewell letters before matches simply because that day's emperor was known to be difficult. And on some days, the emperor just felt generous. Spare them all today. I feel merciful. And just like that, everyone survived. Even the guy who nearly sliced off his ear. But the next day, he'd change his mind. One wrong move, one careless comment, and the outcome reversed completely. And though everyone knew it was unjust, no one dared speak up. The crowd could scream and shout, but would fall silent if the emperor was angry. Gladiators could bow their heads in frustration, but still knelt respectfully and walked away. The laws of the arena weren't written by justice. One man's mood wrote them. Of course, there were fair emperors too, who judged matches with respect and valued actual skill, but they were the minority. Most wanted to be entertained, and if you didn't deliver satisfaction, then even if you won, you still lost. So among the hundreds who stepped into the arena, many probably thought, "I wish he'd had a better breakfast today." But you don't have to worry about that. Tonight, no one's watching you from the stands. No emperor is judging you. No thumbs pointing your way. No command to spare. No indifferent flick of the wrist. Just peace. Just breathe. Just sleep. Today you wake up in a pitch-dark underground room. The door cacks open. A soldier steps inside, hands you a piece of glittering cloth, a pair of fake horns, and a torch. He says, "Get ready." You're the miner. You say nothing. You have no idea what's happening. But that's fine. No one plans on explaining anyway, and just like that, you, an ordinary citizen, once a weaver in a peaceful countryside town, are now cast as a half-man, half-bull monster in a reenactment of a Greek myth in the middle of the Roman arena. Yes. Welcome to the Ludi Mythici, the mythological games where gladiators weren't just expected to fight and perform. You might think, oh, it's probably like theatre, not real combat. Nope, nothing in the Colosseum was pretend. Real props, real people, real wounds. The only fake part was the myth, edited at will. The Romans were obsessed with mythology. They loved everything from Hercules to Perseus, from Achilles to serpent-tailed monsters. And when they decided to bring those stories to life in the arena, they did it in the most Roman way possible, turning them into bloody spectacles. One morning, for instance, the arena might be transformed into a giant wooden maze. Inside, someone would be forced to play Theseus, sword in hand, on a quest to find and slay the monster. And you guessed it, someone else got picked to be the monster. Usually a prisoner or captive thrown into a costume made of fur, handed a mask and told, "Howl a bit. Roar if you want, but don't run too soon." Most of them didn't get to act for very long. After all, the sword wielder often earned his freedom by winning. So his first strike tended to be quick and brutal. And the crowd would cheer wildly, not out of sorrow, but because, wow, that scene looked so real. Some shows reenacted gods fighting monsters, but instead of theatre tricks, the actor playing the god wore shining armor, while the monster was tied to a post and dressed like a hydra with no regenerating heads. Sometimes they even used real animals. A show might recreate the story of Artemis punishing a poacher, the poacher tied up while a few leopards were released to carry out the divine sentence. If the myth called for a god to fight a crocodile, they'd bring in an actual crocodile. No one ever asked, do myths really need to be this realistic? To the Romans, what mattered was whether the audience got their thrill. Mythology was just the framework, the rush. That was the goal. But for the people forced to perform, it was often their final role. And here's the strange part. Most of them didn't even know what role they were playing. Many of those forced into these performances were enslaved people or prisoners from faraway places who barely spoke Latin. Someone who handed a lion-skinned cloak might think he was playing a king. Someone cast as the lead might be a character whose entire job was to appear and then get taken down in 20 seconds. Sometimes the performance went off script. There's one story of an actor playing Hercules who forgot the ending. He stabbed him for real instead of pretending to knock out his opponent. The opponent collapsed. The audience applauded, but the producer shouted, "Wrong line." Of course, no one blamed him. If you're wearing animal skins, holding a wooden club, and someone comes charging you with a real sword, missing a cue seems fair. These reenactments usually happen during major festivals or imperial celebrations. The goal, entertain the people, honor the gods, and give the condemned a meaningful role. Sounds noble, but really it just meant you got thrown into the arena with some shiny accessories and hoped your death looked dramatic. The only bit of consolation, sometimes the god would trip and the crowd would switch sides. There's one story where the monster survived while the hero fumbled his grip and had to run laps around the arena. The crowd laughed so hard that the monster was spared for giving them a truly unforgettable moment. But that was rare. Most shows still ended the same way. One person standing in the center of the arena and the other no longer standing. All because the Romans wanted to see what mythology would look like. But you don't have to play any role tonight. No gods, no monsters, no itchy fur costumes, no ropes, no rehearsals, no scripts to memorize. Just quiet now. Just you breathing softly as the curtain falls on the day. You survive the myths, the costumes, the chaos, and the crowds. But the moment the roar of the Colosseum fades, you're not sent home with flowers. You're sent to school. Not the kind with books and lessons. The kind where you either learn to fight fast or never make it to your second class. You are captured, marked, hauled onto a wooden cart. No one explains much except for a short sentence from the guard escorting you. You'll be trained. And just like that, you arrive at the Ludas, the gladiator training school. Sounds like a skill development center. Don't get your hopes up. There are no spacious classrooms, friendly coaches, or fruit during lunch breaks. A ludus is more like a prison. Only here, they're not training you to rejoin society. They're teaching you to fight and ideally not die too fast. You're in another world from the moment you step through the gate. High walls, armed guards, real chains. No one greets you with a smile. The first person you meet is the record keeper holding a list, sizing up your height, weight, teeth, even the shape of your shoulder bones. They might dismiss you on the spot if you're limping or too skinny. But if you look at usable, congratulations. You've officially joined one of the harshest training programs in the Roman Empire. Each day begins before dawn. While it's still dark, you're jolted awake by a staff pounding the iron gate. Everyone lines up, gulps some stale water, and begins the day's drills. There's no soft bedding, no alarm clocks, just a trainer whose voice booms louder than thunder and a stick he uses to correct your stance if you're not standing just right. Training lasts for hours. You learn how to hold a sword properly, how to brace a shield, how to pivot without tripping, how to retreat without losing balance, and most importantly, how never to turn your back when you hear footsteps. You're sorted into groups, depending on what kind of gladiator you'll become. Some are trained as MMOs with large swords and heavy shields. Some become Rhetari, using nets and trident. Others are cast as the slow and strong type, wielding clubs and shoulder armor. No matter your category, training is brutal. You strike wooden posts until your arms go numb. You run laps in armor that weighs more than you do. You leap over sand pits, crawl under thorn ropes, balance on planks. Not for fitness, but because real arenas are never smooth or forgiving. As for meals, not what you'd call gourmet. Every day you get bean soup, hard bread, and maybe a scrap of meat if you're lucky. No wine, no dessert, just enough to keep you from fainting during the afternoon drills. But the most challenging part isn't hunger, it's control. You're not allowed outside. You're not allowed to speak too loudly. You can't keep anything sharp. You must ask permission for everything. Guards follow you. You're locked behind a heavy gate every night, sleeping on dirt or a rough wooden bed. Some try to escape. Most fail. One scaled the wall, caught within 30 minutes. One faked an illness, but was exposed when a rat ran across him, and he didn't flinch. Those who get caught are punished, whipped, shackled. Some disappear altogether and no one mentions them again. And yet, surprisingly, some ludi have fair trainers. They teach properly, thoroughly. They don't want you to die early. If you perform well, the school gains prestige. The more you win, the more the school earns. So some trainers treat you like a living investment. They shout, but also show you how to twist your body to lessen a blow or fake an injury to retreat safely when things go wrong. Some of these trainers are former gladiators, veterans of dozens of fights. They don't say much, but a single line, "Watch your left ankle," that's where they aim. Can save your life. And sometimes bonds form in the school. You train with others, eat with them, run with them, take hits together. When someone gets hurt, the others help wrap their wounds. No one wants to see their friends dragged to the arena too soon because they know today it's him. Tomorrow it might be me. Eventually you'll hear the words, "You're ready." Not as praise, but as a name on a list with a date, a time, and the details of your first match. That's when it becomes real. You're no longer just training. You're a gladiator. And your debut, even if it's on a quiet weekday morning, is the moment everything changes. It might be the first time you feel powerful, or the first time you think completely alone. But that's the path for those who enter the ludus. And you don't have to walk it tonight. No one will pound on your door at dawn. No one will make you carry a sword, run under the sun, or bow before a shouting trainer. You don't need to memorize strike patterns or practice stances for 3 hours. You can rest. You've spent weeks in training. You've learned how to grip a sword, hold a shield, twist your shoulders, and even fall gracefully. And now you're being led out into the arena for the very first time. Your body is dripping with sweat, your heart is racing, and your legs are trembling slightly, but still you tell yourself, "I'm ready." And then the match begins and ends in 3 seconds. Welcome to the world of one-hit finishes. Brutal duels where no matter how prepared the fighters are, a single mistake is all it takes for everything to be over. The shortest recorded match in the arena lasted less than 5 heartbeats. One man stepped out, bowed his head, hadn't even raised his shield when his opponent lunged and drove a blade straight into his gut. Game over. The crowd didn't have time to settle in after the opening drum roll. No one clapped. They just gasped and then fell silent. The cleanup crew came out quietly with a stretcher. The survivor was let out. The next match started within minutes, as if the previous one was just a minor technical glitch. These kinds of fights weren't rare. Even seasoned fighters lost focus, slipped, or didn't expect the other guy to be that reckless. Some charged full speed before the signal. Some pretended to stumble to bait their opponent into a mistake. Sometimes all it took was a single misstep, and the rest unraveled too quickly to fix. Short matches often happened when a veteran faced a newcomer or when there was an apparent mismatch in size, weapon, or sheer luck. There's an old account of a young man on his first day in the arena. So nervous he dropped his sword before he'd even drawn it. His opponent shrugged, stepped forward, raised his blade, and that was that. The crowd hadn't even had time to ask, "Wait, was that the rehearsal?" To spectators, these lightning-fast fights were oddly thrilling and frustrating. They'd waited hours, pushed through the crowds, eager to witness an epic showdown, only for the show to end in 5 seconds flat. Often, organizers had to throw in a bonus fight immediately to fill the emotional void. But for the gladiator, there's no do-over, no apologies. No one stands up and says, "He wasn't ready. Let's try again." There's no whistle for a timeout. There's only reality. One name crossed off a list, one suit of armor left in the changing room, and that's it. Some veteran gladiators would say, pretend every match is your last, because sometimes it is. That's why these quick matches left everyone backstage rattled. Newbies would grow more anxious. Veterans would double-check their boots, shield straps, and helmet buckles. Not because they feared losing, but because all it took was one careless second. Of course, some quick matches were loved by the crowd. For example, a gladiator spun, kicked his opponent's weapon out of his hand, and then sliced off his helmet with a clean upward strike. That fight lasted 15 seconds, and the entire arena was on their feet, cheering as if they'd just seen magic. The winner that day was spared. And the loser, lucky to have only a torn chest plate, was also kept around because his acting was so entertaining. Those were rare moments when even a quick end brought a good outcome for both. But most of the time, the ending wasn't so poetic. Many fighters are remembered not for their skill, but for how fast they lost. There's even graffiti in Pompeii showing a man sprawled out, sword still in its sheath, with the caption, "He didn't get the blade out in time." It's funny until you remember that was a real person with a name, a family who trained for weeks, maybe months, only to disappear in a moment no one expected. And yes, some ended their matches on purpose, not because they were weak, not because they were afraid, but deep down they didn't want to continue because they knew. They stepped forward, bowed, and dropped their weapon. Some were spared, some were not. Did the emperor feel generous that day? Was the audience bored enough to want blood? No one could tell, because in the Roman arena, life and death weren't decided by swords, but by feelings. But you don't have to plan every move with that much pressure. You don't have to stare down an opponent holding your breath for a signal. No one's asking you to be ready in 3 seconds. Tonight, all that's asked of you, it is to breathe, to rest, to drift. No shields, no screams, just peace. You step into the arena. The sand is still fresh. Your armor still gleams. You're ready. This is your first real match, and you've trained for it. And then from the stands comes the first shout, "Hit him already. Don't be like that last guy." You look up. A bearded man holding a wine jug is pointing at you and laughing hysterically. Welcome to the most unpredictable part of every Roman match, the spectators. And not just any spectators, drunken ones. Wine flowed like river water during major festivals like Saturnalia or Ludi Romani. People celebrated, drank, cheered wildly, and forgot they were watching real people in real fights. Over 50,000 crammed into the Colosseum. Many had been drinking since dawn, some brought their flasks, some bought wine right in the stands. So by the time your match begins, you're not just facing your opponent, you're facing thousands of very vocal wine-fueled opinions. Some scream your name, even if they don't know it. Some cheer for you because you look like their cousin. Some yell anything at all. Slash him. I bet money on you. You don't know what they bet, but you can feel the pressure, not just on your skills, but on how you stand, breathe, even how your hair moves in the sun. Drunk spectators hold nothing back. Do well, they cheer, shout, and even throw coins onto the sand, which the guards will quickly scoop up. Make a mistake. They boo. They whistle. They nickname you things like wobbly legs or the sleeping gladiator. Some even sing. Yes, some bring little lyres and improvise their personal theme song mid-fight. Others don't bother with lyrics, slur whatever comes to mind. Stab him, lad. Don't be like my uncle back then. No one knows what it means. Everyone laughs. Even worse, some groups split into rival camps, one side rooting for you, the other for your opponent, and begin arguing across the tiers like it's ancient football. At times, they even try to help by throwing things into the arena. An apple, a sandal, a broken belt. Officials must stop the match and send in guards to clean up because someone got carried away with encouragement. Now, not all spectators are obnoxious. Plenty come to watch respectfully, cheering with admiration, not mockery. But with thousands of voices slurred by wine, the atmosphere quickly turns chaotic, and sometimes it messes with the fight. Some fighters lose focus because of all the shouting. Some get hit while turning towards someone calling their name. One poor soul tripped because he laughed too hard when someone yelled, "Punch his face." Better than punching a stew pot. No one knows what it meant. But it was funny, and laughing, as you can imagine, is not ideal when holding a sword. Ironically, though, if you make them laugh, you might survive. Many matches going badly turned around with one well-timed tumble, a dramatic fake death, or an over-the-top reaction. Suddenly, the crowd's laughing and clapping and asking the emperor to spare you. Some gladiators didn't survive because they fought well. They survived because they entertained well. One gladiator named Felix told a story of nearly losing a match until he rolled during a fall and accidentally wore a helmet that had dropped nearby. The whole crowd erupted in laughter. Even the emperor chuckled. He was spared. Another earned his nickname Gas the Stubborn because after taking 5 hits without falling, a drunk man yelled, "This guy's made of stone." And the name stuck, carved right into the fight records. The problem is, no one teaches you how to fight in front of thousands of drunk strangers. The training schools cover how to block, strike, and hold your shield, but not how to stay calm while 30,000 people argue about your sandals. So every gladiator eventually learns the one essential skill. Ignore what doesn't matter. The yelling, let it fade. The insults, let them pass. Someone shouting about your armor color, not your problem. You focus on your opponent, on your breath, on your stance, and let the noise blur into a background hum. You're not worried about the voices outside your head. All you hear is your heartbeat, slow and steady. Your breath is calm, grounded, and the stillness slowly unfolding in your mind. You don't need to fight the chaos. You need to step aside from it. You've heard of the tiger fights. You've heard of the underwater battles. You've heard of drunken spectators shouting in your face, but there's one type of match no training school prepares you for. Not because it's dangerous, but because no one dares admit it exists. Welcome to the broom fight. Yes, real brooms. Wooden handles, straw bristles. One for each fighter. No armor, no helmet. Just you, your opponent, and an arena full of spectators expecting a very cheerful afternoon. These matches were held during rest days when the emperor wanted more laughter than blood, or when there were just too many children in the stands. The organizers called them Ludiskinici, gladiator, theatrical gladiator games, but most people called it the bloody dust sweep. There wasn't any blood, just a lot of dust, and even more falling. Usually the two chosen fighters were old, injured gladiators, men no longer fit for real combat, but still quick on their feet and with a good sense of humor. Some were retired soldiers, some were former bakers who'd fought a few matches and gotten kept around for their comedic falls. They'd walk into the arena dressed ridiculously, leather skirts, shoulder pads made of nutshells, and helmets adorned with chicken feathers. Each got a broom. Not too long, just enough to poke at the other's legs or trip them gently. The match wouldn't begin with drums, but with a long horn blown by a tired older man, a sound that resembled a snore being strangled. And so began the sweeping. No real fighting, no stabbing, no slashing, just bursts of dust kicked into each other's faces. Playful chases around the arena, exaggerated slips, fake falls, and dramatic recoveries as if nothing had happened. The crowd howled with laughter. Some laughed at two grown men chasing each other like kids. Some laughed because the dust made one sneeze uncontrollably. Some just laughed because one broom snapped in half and the other man held it up triumphantly like he'd disarmed the enemy. Sometimes the organizers leveled it up by making the fighters climb ropes in the center of the arena while swatting at each other with their brooms. Whoever fell first lost, but who fell more dramatically won the crowd's heart. Once the two broom fighters rolled together until they were a tangled knot on the ground. No one could tell whose arm belonged to whom. Guards had to come and untangle them, and the audience gave a standing ovation as if it were a theatrical masterpiece. Of course, no one got hurt, or if they did, it was from laughing too hard. After the match, the two bowed like circus performers. They were showered with bread, fruit, and if lucky, a bronze coin. Not much, but enough to buy a sweet treat after the show. Sometimes broom fights softened the mood after a particularly bloody match. The Romans knew the crowd needed emotional balance, and nothing did that better than two older men running in circles with cleaning tools. Some professional gladiators were even jealous. While they trained with swords, spilled blood, and risked their lives, these two broom-wielding retirees got more applause than any of them. But who cared? Romans saw it as a necessary part of the arena experience. Not every match had to end in death. Some called for tears, some for laughter, and some just needed a broom. And two people refused to quit. You could see everything in the Colosseum: war, love, betrayal, and sweeping. And strangely, these intermission matches were often the most memorable. Some elders recalled that their first show wasn't a tiger fight. It was an older man tumbling 5 times and wearing a broom on his head like a crown. And they never forgot it. As for you, you don't need to wear feathers. You don't need to run in circles with a broom. You don't have to pretend to fall on cue. You need to close your eyes, think of gentle laughter, and let your mind drift into the soft, dusty silence of a place once filled with roars. You hear the news. You're about to fight. But before you're allowed into the arena, there's one thing you must do first: rehearse. The Romans never sent anyone into the arena without a proper rehearsal, but don't start imagining a spacious training field, a friendly coach, and a few teammates helping you practice combos. No, it's not like that at all. Rehearsals in ancient Rome could be even more exhausting than the real match. Every gladiator school had a designated training area called the palestra. That's where you would go through simulated combat sessions with wooden weapons, minimal armor, and usually under a sun so hot it could fry your thoughts. The goal to get you used to pressure, to the presence of a crowd, and most importantly, to getting hit. Typically, the trainer would pair up 2 people of similar level. If you were new, you'd fight another newbie. If you were weak, they'd match you with someone less weak. But no matter who you faced, you still had to go through the whole ritual. Bow, take your stance, control your breathing, and endure pain. Because even though it's just a rehearsal, people still hit hard. Sometimes harder than in the real arena, hoping to impress. Some rookies broke their arms in the second session simply because they forgot to duck at the wrong moment. The trainers didn't stop it. They only said, if it doesn't hurt, it doesn't count. There were days when the whole group had to take turns fighting, a few minutes per person. Even if you were exhausted, you couldn't stop. Anyone who asked for a break was forced to run 10 laps around the field in full armor. the hardest drill, standing alone in the arena while the trainers simulated crowd noise. Some were very creative. They got guards to play rowdy spectators, yelling insults, clapping, whistling. Sometimes they'd even throw cold water on you mid-swing to simulate unexpected scenarios. And you had to stay calm, no flinching, no backing off. Just adjust your posture and continue. There were also scripted scenario sessions where your role was to lose. You'd be thrown down, told to stay still, and wait while your opponent raised their fake sword. If you moved at the wrong time, they'd hit you for real, to help you remember not to do that again. Some said the rehearsals were scarier than the real fight because you knew you couldn't win and still had to keep taking hits. And if you messed up, the trainer wrote it down. No praise, just notes. Notes that would be used to make tomorrow's session even harder. But practice wasn't just about fighting. You also had to learn how to fall correctly. Sounds easy, right? It's not. Fall the wrong way and you're injured. Fall too awkwardly and you bore the crowd. Fall beautifully but too early. And people might think you're faking defeat, so you were taught to fall sideways, roll over, spin as you dropped, collapse out of nowhere. Each type of fall required perfect timing between your head, shoulder, and the ground. Those who trained well got to try the real arena, but only during dry runs. That meant a short match, no audience under supervision. Guards noted your movement, reaction time, and how well you kept your rhythm. If you passed, you were officially added to the eligible to perform list. Sounds fancy, but really it just meant your turn to face life and death was coming. Some people even tried not to pass. They held their sword wrong, pretended to stumble. I hope to be assigned to the supporting cast, those who ran around the arena getting slapped lightly and not fighting. But if the trainer suspected you were faking, your training would double. Truly weak. You might get sympathy pretending to be weak. That meant you were lazy. You couldn't avoid the training, but no one expected you to love it. One saying went, "Training is where you find your limits. The real match is where you're forced to go past them." And despite the pain, exhaustion, and occasional embarrassment, you still had to stand up, brush the sand off, and keep going. Thankfully, tonight, you don't have to rehearse anything. No wooden swords, no iron helmets, no one shouting in your face. You're holding the shield wrong. You're standing in the middle of the arena. The sand beneath your feet is hot. You're wearing armor, heavy and tight. In your hand is a spear, and behind you, the iron gate has just slammed shut. Ahead of you, a lion, massive, thick-maned eyes glowing golden like fire. It emerges from the animal gate, stepping into the crowd's cheers. Everyone holds their breath. Then it sits down. Yes, it doesn't roar, doesn't leap, doesn't charge. It sits, licks its paw, lets out a long yawn, and lies down entirely. And the audience isn't sure whether to laugh or be disappointed. Welcome to one of the many failed matches in the history of the Colosseum, where a beast carefully trained and starved for hours to ensure aggression suddenly doesn't feel like fighting. It wasn't all that rare. Wild animals are still living beings, no matter how confined, provoked, or released on schedule. And sometimes they're tired. Some walked out and immediately turned back, pawing at the gate as if to say, "Oops, wrong exit. Can I go back in?" Others wandered around the arena, sniffing the ground as if looking for a lost breakfast. Sometimes they'd find a few crumbs of bread tossed by the crowd the day before and sit down to eat. The fighter facing them would feel both relieved and anxious. Relieved they weren't being torn apart. Anxious because what now? Some gladiators tried banging their weapons and stomping the ground. Some shouted, jumped, and ran around to provoke the animal. But still, the beast didn't care. One even lay on its back, belly to the sky like sunbathing. The crowd split in opinion. Some laughed hysterically, clapping and shouting, "What a cute kitty." Others whistled in disapproval. "This match is a joke." Organizers panicked. Sometimes they signaled to release another animal. But if the second one was also indifferent, the whole arena turned into a lazy zoo. A sign was missing, "Please don't feed the lions." Of course, sometimes someone did get eaten because you could never predict a wild animal's mood. One lion dozed off after walking in, then 10 minutes later woke up, let out a majestic roar, and lunged at the nearest person. Another tiger spent 5 minutes licking its paw, then struck so fast no one had time to react. But most of these gentle rebellions served as a reminder. No matter how scripted the event, some things remain beyond control. And the Romans hated that. They loved drama and suspense, so they also wanted everything to go according to plan. A lion acting like a sleepy house cat was not part of the script. So these matches often ended in collective awkwardness. There were days when the animal handler had to walk into the arena, waving a stick with fresh meat on the end, trying to lure the lion like a dog. The lion would glance, think for a second, then turn away and head back to its corner. The audience improvised their side entertainment, betting on how long it would take for the lion to move. Some clapped rhythmically, others mimicked roars to inspire the beast. There was even a story of a gladiator who befriended the animal. After 20 minutes of nothing, he sat down, removed his helmet, took off a shoulder plate, and the lion walked over and lay beside him. No attack, just two creatures, both wondering how they ended up here. The audience burst into tears, not out of emotion, but from laughing hard. That day, the entire arena gave a standing ovation. Both friends were spared. The lion was rewarded with double rations. The gladiator became a minor legend, nicknamed the Lion Whisperer. Not every match ended that sweetly, but moments like those, unplanned, unscripted, made the arena feel just a little less cruel and reminded everyone that sometimes doing nothing at all is a kind of bravery. As for you, tonight you won't be facing a lion, tired or hungry. You won't have to scream for survival or perform for 50,000 roaring strangers. No one's waiting for you to roar. No one's beating a drum to signal your attack. You're in the middle of the Colosseum. You've just parried a slash from your opponent. Sweat drips, sand swirls. You step back half a pace, struggling to stay balanced. Then thud, something flies from the stands and hits your shoulder. Not a sword, not an arrow. It's a loaf of bread. You flinch. Your opponent pauses. Both of you glance upward. In the stands, a bearded man stands up holding the other half of the loaf and shouts, "Feed him!" He looks too weak. Welcome to a lesser-known side of the Roman arena. The audience didn't just watch, they participated, and their enthusiasm didn't always help. Roman spectators were extremely proactive. They didn't just cheer, they threw things from compliments and whistles to mystery objects. If they loved you, you might get an apple, a handkerchief, or a tiny laurel wreath. If they hated you, congratulations. You might take an olive pit to the face. And don't think the projectiles were all in good fun. Romans were inventive. Some threw sandals, others flung half-eaten fish bones. One guy tossed a miniature oil lamp. A gladiator once got injured by a clay pot of honey that smashed into his cheek, launched from the third tier. Why? The thrower said, "He fights like crap." I thought he needed some energy. Some fights were even postponed because the crowd got too rowdy. Two groups of fans started shouting at each other. Then someone angrily threw a wine cup. 10 minutes later, half the stands were engaged in a food fight. Meanwhile, the gladiators stared at each other in the arena, unsure whether to keep going. Guards eventually had to intervene. The match was paused due to viewer interference. Some spectators even liked giving tactical advice. They shouted things like, "Press left," "Back out," "Don't stand there, idiot," "Raise your shield for Jupiter's sake." Who taught you that? And you know what's strange? Sometimes they were right. A few in the crowd were veterans or retired gladiators. They sat there with wine watching your footwork, yelling like dads teaching toddlers how to hold a spoon. Most of the time, though, not helpful. One guy once yelled, "Give him your shield. You use a broom instead." No one knew what that meant, but the crowd roared with laughter. Some fans even brought props. One older man was famous for carrying a war horn made from a bull's horn. Whenever he saw someone fight well, he'd blow it, producing a long mooing sound like a lovesick ox. People nearby covered their ears. Fighters got distracted. Once a gladiator missed his swing because the horn blared just as he struck. The crowd laughed. Trainers fumed, but the old man got applause for making the match more fun. You begin to realize that in the Colosseum, You're not just fighting the person before you. You're fighting 50,000 mouths, 50,000 hands, and a constant airborne nonsense from the third tier. The worst part when the audience turns on you. If you're too dull, too timid, or worse, unremarkable, they'll start to boo. First, a few scattered jeers. Then it swells, wave-like. Soon the whole arena is a storm of sound. Boo! Get him out! Go back to training! Kill him already! An emperor once ended a match early because the crowd was too loud to hear the signal horn. Still, it wasn't all bad. Some fighters were so beloved that the crowd spared them even in defeat. Some had poems written about them, carved into walls. One became a legend just for smiling after getting an egg thrown in his face. His grin made the whole arena applaud. You can't control the crowd, but you can learn to survive it. Steady your breath. Don't look up too long, and if something flies at you, dodge gracefully. Please don't eat it unless you're sure it's bread and not still warm. Luckily, you're not in that arena tonight. No one's pointing, shouting, or asking why you keep missing your swings. No one's throwing bread. There's no smell of wine, no sweat, no war horn. You step into the arena, gripping your wooden sword, palms slick with sweat. You're ready to face a fierce opponent, a towering gladiator or a sneaky leopard slipping from the iron gate. But no one comes. The gate across the arena remains shut. No drums, no announcer, just you standing alone in the sand under the watchful gaze of tens of thousands of spectators, murmuring, "Huh? What's going on?" Yes, today you've been chosen for a solo performance. This isn't a joke. In all their creativity and boredom, the Romans once organized performances featuring just one person in the arena, acting out all the roles or battling something invisible. Sounds absurd, but it's true. These one-man shows were often used as warm-up acts. The real matches hadn't started yet, but the crowd was already seated. The organizers didn't want them to wait in silence, so they sent someone out to do something. And that something could be just about anything. One performer mimed a fight with himself, throwing punches, dodging, and dramatically collapsing. Another played two characters at once, turning left to be the villain, turning right to be the hero. He ran in circles, then fell over dramatically to wild applause. Others were tasked with more abstract roles, battling the wind, the darkness, or an invisible tree threatening the empire. Once a man was ordered to slay a dragon no one could see. He dashed around, swinging his sword, yelling, stabbing the air. Finally, he collapsed, then sprang up, shouting, "I've triumphed." The crowd clapped, not because they believed it, but because they were stunned. One morning, a gladiator was sent out to demonstrate courage by simply standing still for 10 minutes. He stood in full armor, motionless and silent. At first, the audience was confused. After 5 minutes, they clapped. After 8, they cheered. By 10, they threw bread because what else were they supposed to do? It was considered a successful performance. But not all went smoothly. One poor man was so nervous that he tripped the moment he entered. The audience thought it was part of the act until he didn't get back up. Guards had to carry him out, and the organizers scrambled to bring on a backup singer to fill the time. You may ask why stage such strange spectacles. Because the Romans didn't see the arena as just a battlefield. They saw it as a stage, and every stage needs a mix of tragedy, comedy, action, and the occasional solo improv. Sometimes the reason was practical. The scheduled fighters were late, injured, or refused a show. So a stand-in was sent to keep the crowd entertained. And sometimes they were the only ones brave enough to go out there and perform to thin air. Not everyone could do it. You had to be bold, confident, able to look into the void and imagine something terrifying there. You needed to swing your weapon without hitting yourself, fall convincingly without being pushed, and most of all, draw in the crowd using your lonely presence. And strangely enough, some people became legends for matches with no one else in them. One performer named Marius became known as the man who spoke to the wind. He often acted out mythical scenes, chatting with gusts of air, battling thunder, and sometimes singing to himself. One night, he staged a fight against fear itself. No enemy, no weapon, just trembling hands, wide eyes, and slow, steady recovery. He straightened up, lifted his arms to the sky, and the crowd fell silent, then rose to their feet, applauding. No blood, no swords, but it became one of the most remembered matches of all. Of course, there were flops too, like the performer who forgot his lines, stood awkwardly for a while, then pretended to faint to end it. And you? Tonight you don't have to fight the void. You don't have to fake a fall. You don't need to duel an imaginary dragon. No one's watching your every move. No one's waiting for your dramatic spin. You need to close your eyes and rest. You're called out to the arena at dawn. The sky is still dim, dew clinging to the sand. You assume today will be a simple rehearsal or at worst a light exhibition match. But no. Your trainer pats you on the shoulder and says, "Congratulations. You've been assigned a team." You glance to your left and see an older man with a silver beard, barely reaching your shoulder, belly round as a water barrel, scratching his back with his helmet. That's your teammate today. Welcome to the tag team match, where your survival doesn't depend on your skills and the hope that the person beside you won't completely mess it up. Tag team fights weren't as common as one-on-one bouts in the Roman arena, but they happened often enough. Partly because the crowd loved chaos, and partly because there were too many people to fight and insufficient slots for solo matches. So the organizers paired people up, tall with short, quick with slow, rookies with veterans. The result, chaotic fun and sometimes total disaster. You're given a small shield and a short spear. Your teammate, the round-bellied uncle, is handed a wooden mace nearly as big as he is. He winks at you and says, "Don't worry. I used to fight bulls in my youth." You're not sure what happened to those bulls, but you silently pray today won't be a reenactment of that skill set. The match begins. You two step out. Your opponents, a pair that looks very professional. Matching armor, synchronized steps, shields raised like they're rehearsing a dance. You turn to your teammate, signaling a strategy. He nods, then charges straight into the center of the arena, shouts something unintelligible, and immediately slips and falls. The crowd roars with laughter. You barely have time to react before the enemy lunges. You block, twist, evade, then hear a clunk behind you. Your teammate is trying to scoop sand out of his shoe with the head of his mace. That's the moment you realize today you're fighting solo and your partner is accidental comic relief. In tag team matches, the hardest part isn't the fighting, it's the coordination. One person moves too fast, the other can't keep up. One charges, the other backs off. There was even a match where both fighters from the same team hit each other because they forgot who was supposed to guard which side. Romans didn't waste time teaching teamwork. All they cared about was who was still standing at the end. So if you got smacked because your partner slipped, that's just part of the show. Still, some pairs were incredible. Some trained together from the same lutus. They knew each other's moves so well they could swap positions with a glance. Some had secret signals. 3 taps on the shield meant attack. 1 tap meant retreat. Their matches felt like choreographed dances. The crowd adored them, but those pairs were rare. Most were mismatches. Old and young, strong and frail, tall and squat. Some pairs got so attached that they tried to flee together. They were caught, punished, and assigned to each other again. No one else dared team up with them afterward. Sometimes one fighter would be excellent, agile, powerful, skilled, but their partner tripped over themselves 3 times in a minute. By the end of the match, the crowd would boo. Keep the guy on the left, replace the one on the right. Guess which side you were on that day. But sometimes the one you think is a burden surprises you. A famous story. A young muscular gladiator was trapped, surrounded. His partner, an older man with a busted arm, could barely lift his shield. Everyone thought they were doomed, but the older man picked up a stone and hurled it at the enemy's foot. Didn't kill him, but it tripped him up just enough. The young fighter lunged in and ended the fight in 10 seconds. The crowd stood and chanted, "The old man saved the match." The emperor rewarded him with a fine bottle of wine and the nickname, the Decisive Stone. So in a tag team match, the most important thing isn't strength, it's spirit. It's choosing to trust someone you've never trained with. It's laughing when they mess up and standing beside them when danger hits. Kind of like you now. No need for a teammate, no coordination drills, No shouting left or cover me. You're called out to the arena earlier than usual. No training today, no rehearsals, no one explains what's going on. Just a short message today, special match, just perform as usual. You step into the arena. The stands are nearly complete. The drums beat at a steady rhythm, not too intense. No lions, no tigers, just you, a small disheveled man in armor older than your sandals. You salute. The other man bows, then sneezes. The entire arena bursts into laughter. And from that moment, you know this won't be like any match you fought before. Welcome to the world of accidental comedy matches where everything should be serious, but somehow drifts into hilarity unplanned and uninvited. It's not about a script. It's not intentional. It's just people and the truth that sometimes people can't help but laugh when everything goes perfectly wrong. There was once a match where both fighters were so nervous that they missed their strikes, stumbled into each other, and then stood back up in perfect mirrored sync. The crowd gasped in unison, then erupted into laughter when one man's sandal got tangled in his shield strap, and he spent a full minute trying to shake free. In another match, a gladiator accidentally swung his sword and ripped the tunic of a guard standing at the edge. The guard turned purple with rage. The fighter bowed and apologized while the audience lost it, shouting, "Let the guard fight too." Once during a match between two rookies, one crammed up mid-fight. He dropped to the ground, clutching his leg. His opponent panicked, then awkwardly began massaging it. The crowd laughed so hard that a section of the stands almost rolled down a few steps. Moments like these don't make it into the history books, but they stay in the minds of those who were there because they're the rare times the arena stops terrifying and starts being oddly heartwarming. Romans loved drama, but they also loved to laugh. They didn't need flawless combat. They wanted something real. And nothing is more real than a fighter in the middle of the arena, hair standing on end from an overzealous blood rinse, screaming, "Gods, that's freezing." Sometimes these comedic misfires became regular segments. Certain fighters would be cast as the fool in side matches, tripping at the right moment, tumbling with flair, screaming dramatically. Audiences adored it, and after a bloody morning, laughing at someone who faints at a fake thunderclap was a way for everyone to exhale a little. You ask, did they get punished for being silly? Number as long as the crowd enjoyed it. No one complained. The arena existed for entertainment, and if one perfectly timed fall made 30,000 people laugh, that could be the most effective strike of the day. Of course, please don't overdo it. Some tried too hard to be funny, pretending to slip every time they missed, howling in agony over minor scratches. At first, the audience laughed, but if you performed without actually fighting, they'd start booing and suggest you join a traveling theatre troupe instead. Humor only works when it is genuine, from mistakes, surprise, and human error, not from rehearsed routines. Some matches ended so unexpectedly that the crowd froze and burst out laughing, like the one where both fighters lost their shields, ended up wrestling, and tumbled down together like two old friends reuniting after years. That match became known as the reunion of bones. And the best part, no one had to die. No blood, no grand victory. Just the shared relief of walking away from the arena floor or the marble benches feeling okay. You today don't need to be a hero or a clown. No need to raise your shield at the perfect moment. No need to fake the perfect fall. Just lie back, let your head settle, and allow all these battles in your mind to drift away like a passing breeze. After training, you've just sat down to retie your sandals when a guard approaches and hands you a list. It's not the training schedule, it's the fight roster, and your name is next to a completely unfamiliar one. Aqua, you figure? Probably a seasoned gladiator. Sounds cool. Latin might be someone who's fought tigers, or at least carries a shield with an eagle on it. That is until you're led into the arena and see your opponent a goose. Yes, a real goose. Long neck, sharp eyes, marching out with a purposeful, slightly furious strut, like someone stole its lunch, and you are now officially part of a match against a non-human opponent. On paper, this sounds absurd, but in ancient Rome, it happened more often than you'd think. With their boundless creativity and endless appetite for entertainment, the Romans often introduced special gladiators that weren't people. chickens, goats, monkeys, hunting dogs, even camels. Once they even had a dolphin participate by leaping out of a temporary water tank set up in the arena. The point wasn't for the animal to win. It was to make the crowd laugh or at least gasp. One dog wore tiny armor and a little leather helmet and sprinted around, barking wildly as a gladiator chased it, too nervous to strike. That act was a crowd favorite, and they repeated it 7 times in one festival season. And the goose you're facing today, it's no amateur. Word around the barracks is that it once won against a fighter. Not with skill, but by chasing him so aggressively. He flung himself out of the arena rather than get pecked in the face. The goose was later nicknamed the White Terror. You stare at it. It stares back. Neither of you has weapons, but its glare, deadly serious. The match begins. You take a cautious step. It stretches its neck and honks so loudly that you freeze. The audience erupts in applause. Someone shouts from the stands, "Show it who's boss, mighty goose." No one knows if it understands, but it charges. You have no idea what to do. Hitting it feels ridiculous. Dodging feels embarrassing. You try to sidestep only to find it hot on your heels, honking like a trumpet. The crowd screams in delight. Guards at the edge of the arena are laughing. Your trainer sighs. Just let it chase you a few laps. The crowd will love it. You run. The goose follows. You pretend to slip. It stops, tilts its head. You bow, mock, surrender. It pecks your boot once, then turns away like it's declared victory. The crowd goes wild. You're spared. The goose is carried back to its pen like a feathery hero. And that afternoon, you walk away unhurt. No bandages needed, just a pair of very slobbery sandals. Of course, it wasn't just geese. The Romans experimented with many animals. One morning, they had a man fight a monkey who immediately stole the man's shield and bolted into the stands. The match was delayed by 15 minutes. People laughed about it for a week. There was even a team elephant versus team horse match. No real violence, just well-trained animals, but the entire arena collapsed from laughter when one elephant backed away after being pecked by a chicken. It sounds like a joke, but it was a very real part of Roman entertainment culture. Using any living creature that could provoke an emotion, fear, excitement, and yes, laughter. In the end, what matters isn't whether you won or lost. They'll remember you once ran around the arena chased by a proud, angry goose. The audience might forget your name, but they'll never forget the guy who got pecked by the goose. You've heard of legendary warriors. The one who defeated a lion bare-handed, took 3 sword blows without blinking, or won 20 fights in a row and earned his freedom. But maybe you haven't heard of Maximus the Unfortunate. It all began on a calm morning at the Colosseum. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. The sun was shining. A major fight was about to begin. The name being chanted across the stands, Maximus Fortis, meaning Maximus the Mighty. He was tall and muscular with polished armor that gleamed like a mirror. His footsteps made the stone floor tremble. Record, 12 undefeated matches. Rumor had it he once defeated 3 opponents in a single bout. People gasped just hearing about him. His opponent that day, a newcomer, small frame, not much muscle, armor hanging loose like it didn't belong to him. No one knew his name. Some said Titus, others said Timus. No one was sure. The drums rolled. The match began. Maximus stepped forward with booming confidence, the crowd roaring. The other guy took a half step back, holding his shield like a tray of bread. And then within 3 seconds, everything fell apart. Maximus roared and charged, but the arena floor was still damp. Someone had watered it that morning, and his foot slipped. He staggered, tried to recover, but his sword was too heavy, his armor too slick, and then thud. Maximus tripped over his foot, rolled, and landed face down in the dirt. The entire arena froze. His opponent hadn't moved an inch, still standing exactly where he started. A soft clink. Maximus's helmet slid sideways. He tried to get up, but his shoulder knocked his shield, which fell onto his ankle, making him trip again. Smack. This time his head hit the edge of the wooden platform. No blood yet, but plenty of sweat and a whole lot of awkwardness. The audience started to chuckle, then clap, then burst out laughing. Someone shouted, "Shortest match ever." Another replied, "No, funniest match ever." Maximus's trainer buried his face in his hands. Titus or Timus, whoever, stood there confused, holding his sword like he wasn't sure what to do next. Eventually the guard stepped in to help Maximus up. He staggered off the field, his face red as a ripe tomato. The match was officially declared a draw due to unfavorable conditions. And after that, things got interesting. Maximus became the star of graffiti all over Rome on bathhouse walls, sidewalks, and the backs of stadium seats. People drew him slipping, rolling like a barrel with captions like Fortis but not stable. Folk songs followed. Maximus ran, Maximus slipped, Maximus fell, and everyone flipped. But here's the twist. People didn't hate Maximus. They loved him more because after that day, he came back into the arena a little tougher, a little wiser. And this time he didn't slip. He fought well. Didn't win spectacularly, but he held his ground and the crowd cheered louder than ever. Maybe it's because people admire those who fall and still choose to stand again. Maximus was even invited to perform. Seriously, he reenacted his famous fall during festivals. Every time the crowd laughed until they cried. He earned a new unofficial name, Maximus the Tumbler. From that point on, fights began to include a little more humor. No one was embarrassed to slip anymore. No one felt ashamed if they stumbled. Because if Maximus could fall and become a legend, so could anyone. You see, in a world of blood and steel, sometimes the thing people remember most is a very human fall. And you don't need to balance on sand. You don't need to brace yourself before a roaring crowd. You don't need to tense up to prove your worth. Just breathe. And if something in your day makes you feel like you've tripped, remember, sometimes a stumble is the start of something unforgettable. You're standing in line at the arena gates when you overhear the guards behind you whispering. One of them says, "That new guy looks like the god Apollo." Another replies, "Yeah, face like a statue, but sword skills." Hey, you turn around and yeah, he's beautiful. Square jaw, soft curls, sun-kissed skin that looks like it came from an olive oil commercial. He's standing in the sunlight, tilting his head slightly, like he knows people are staring and couldn't be more okay with it. His name is Flavianus, but everyone calls him Pretty Flav. You figure he's probably the son of a senator or an actor who wandered into the wrong training camp. But no, Flav is a real gladiator. Trained, registered. He's even been in the arena before. The only issue, he can't fight. Well, he tries, but every time he lifts his sword, the women in the crowd scream. Not because of his technique, but because the sunlight hits his armor just right. He looks glowing. His first match. Not that impressive. He got hit in the shoulder after 2 minutes, but no one cared. One girl screamed, "Don't hit his face." Another shouted, "If he loses, I'm jumping into the arena." The whole match turned into a live photo shoot. Afterward, no one remembered who won, but everyone remembered that Flav smiled when his shield was knocked away, then bowed to the audience like he just finished a play. And from then on, the organizers realized they had a goldmine. Flav was booked for exhibition matches or the fun slots at the end of the day. He just had to walk into the ring, do a little spin, dodge a few swings, or fall gracefully and smile. That was enough. Flav never won, but he always got spared. There was even a day when his opponent, an old grumpy veteran, raised his sword, paused, sighed and said, "I can't do it." Then Flav shook his hand and they both walked off to a roar of applause. This might be unfair, and yes, by skill standards it is. But in the Roman arena, the most crucial thing wasn't always skill. It was entertainment. A good fighter could win, but someone in the crowd loved could survive. Flav understood this. He never tried to be a hero. He shined in his way. Kids started pretending to be Flav during games, not with swords, but with sticks, pretending to fix their hair. Folk songs appeared. Flav walks past. Wind stops to stare. Flav takes a fall. Sand turns red with flare. Even in the dormitories, Flav was popular, not because he bragged, but because he always shared his snacks. If anyone teased him, "You fight like a dancer." He'd smile and say, "Yeah, dancing and living beats fighting and dying, right?" Hard to argue with that. Of course, not everyone liked Flav. Some said he was spoiled, some were jealous. The crowd shouted his name, while no one remembered the guy who landed 3 clean hits. But eventually, people understood. Everyone plays a role, and sometimes the arena needs someone who makes things feel lighter. Flav never won a fight, but he never lost his calm. He always bowed before the match, nodded after it, and smiled through every cheer or jeer. And you tonight, you don't need to shine under the sun. You don't need a strong jawline or perfect posture. No one's asking you to smile on cue or stand in the spotlight. You need to be you. And if there's ever a moment where you feel like you're not enough compared to someone else out there, just remember, even a guy who couldn't fight made 30,000 people cheer with nothing more than a perfectly timed head tilt. You're woken up at dawn, not by the drumbeat of battle, but by singing. No shouting, no commands, just a clear tenor voice echoing from the training yard. Oh, kill me if you can. You blink awake, rub your eyes, and look out onto the field. And yes, someone is singing in full armor, sword at their side. But instead of swinging steel, he's drawing out a note like he's in the middle of a miniature opera, your trainer size. Today is song combat. You freeze. Song what? On special days, often to honor the god Apollo, or whenever the emperor is in the mood for something easier on the ears, gladiators are ordered to compete by singing. No fighting, no kicking, just stand in the arena face to face and sing. The winner, whoever gets the loudest applause from the crowd, welcome to the strangest duel in Roman history. The singing match. You're handed a lyric sheet. It's short, very old. Lines like, "My heart is harder than steel, but melts at the sight of you." You don't know what to do with it. Others very prepared. Flavianis, the pretty boy from earlier, is the first to step forward. He picks a love ballad. When he begins, the whole stadium goes silent. By the time he sings, you drop my heart like a fallen helmet. The entire third tier is on their feet, clapping like Apollo himself just descended. His opponent sings off key, forgets the lyrics halfway, even coughs during the high note. Polite applause, followed by a few pitiful whistles. Flav wins the match without even sweating. Some days the duels get sassy. One fighter sings, "You fight like a chicken caught in rain." The other retorts, "You're like a fish left on dry land." The crowd roars with laughter. An old lady drops her grape bowl from giggling too hard. The match drags on for 30 minutes. Neither is willing to stop. Eventually the referee steps in. Even Apollo needs a break. Both are declared winners, but not everyone fits this format. Some gruff fighters bellow like barking dogs. Others shake so hard they sing a single note and retreat, asking to change songs. One guy even tries rapping. The Romans don't know rap, so they just sit there confused, unsure whether to clap or call for backup. Some overact. One man spins while singing, waving his sword like a ballet dancer. His helmet flies off. His armor comes undone. The crowd claps, not for the music, but for the slapstick. Then it's your turn. You step forward, heart pounding, not because you fear being stabbed, but because you've never sung in front of 50,000 people. You pick the simplest song on the list. You begin. Your voice isn't great, but it's clear. You don't shake. You sing each line slowly, steadily, and when you finish with, "I do not seek victory, only a little peace," one corner of the arena claps softly but sincerely. You bow, step off the sand, not a winner, but not a joke. Your trainer meets you backstage. Nods. Not bad, at least my ears didn't bleed. From him, that's poetry. After the match, the echoes of the song still float through the arena. People leave their seats calm, almost peaceful. No blood, no dust. Just music lingering in the air, like the memory of something strange yet soothing. One older spectator whispers to another, "Today was more memorable than all those sword fights." And they're right, because sometimes what people remember isn't who fought best, but who made them smile and close their eyes and feel just a little bit lighter. You're polishing your sword after training when you hear an unusual commotion outside the arena. It's not drums, not the horn that summons gladiators, just shouting on the field, lots of it. You step out to sea and have to blink twice. On the arena floor, there are no gladiators, just audience members. A bunch of people in toga and leather sandals. One hand holding bread, the other waving wooden sticks, trying to fight in the clumsiest way imaginable. One man swings so wildly that he loses a sandal. Another sprint in circles like he's playing tag. Someone else stands there yelling because dust got in their eye. You ask a guard what's going on. He shrugs. Spectator trial day. It's their turn to step on the sand. Yes. Apparently, on certain days, either to amuse the emperor or simply because too many spectators have been complaining about the fighters' skills, the organizers pick random members of the audience to try it for themselves. It's called spectacular inversa, the reversed spectacle. Participants are given wooden weapons, light armor, and one simple instruction. Go out there and try not to fall over immediately. Of course, there are no beasts, no professional fighters, just a few soft challenges. Racing, stick blocking, mock duels. The goal isn't to win, but to make the remaining crowd laugh. And laugh they do. One chubby man waddles onto the field, swinging his stick like he's trying to fish. His wife shouts from the stands, "Stop falling over. You never fought anyone in your youth. What are you doing now?" The audience erupts. He backs up, slips, and collapses in slow motion like he's doing a tragic play. A young guy tries to look cool, but his armor is too big. After 3 steps, it slips over his head. He stumbles like an upside-down turtle. You can't help but laugh. Sometimes these games even include a drama contest. Spectators are told to reenact a fight using only their imagination. One pretends to be stabbed and flails dramatically. Another screams out a girlfriend's name and then falls over for real. The emperor loves these events. They're safe, light-hearted, and hilarious. Some winners get prizes like grape cakes, others receive a standing ovation, and the crowd chants their name. Not everyone handles it well, though. Some faint from nerves before setting foot on the sand. One guy tried too hard and flung his wooden sword straight into the referee. The guards had to clear the field after 2 contestants started arguing for real and stormed off mid-match. And the funniest part, after these reversed games, people complain less about gladiators. They realize holding a sword isn't easy. Running in armor is not fun. And just standing under the blazing sun in front of thousands of eyes is enough to turn your legs to jelly. Many come up afterward to shake hands with the gladiators saying, "Now I get it. You're really good." Some even write poems, scratching their names into stone. That day I stepped onto the sand, tripped 3 times, but survived. And I swear from now on, I'll judge no one. You watch for a while, then return backstage feeling surprisingly light. Today, you don't have to fight. No pressure. No one is expecting you to perform. You're just a spectator watching other spectators try to perform. And there's something sweet about that. Tonight, you don't have to win. No need to raise a weapon or smile at the right moment. No one is judging you. No one is waiting for your perfect fall. Just breathe. Loosen up. And if today didn't go quite how you'd hoped, remember that some people trip before they even begin. Everyone stumbles. What matters is they still smile afterward. You've just been called up for a performance match. You ask like a play. The registrar nods. Yes, but the audience doesn't know it's a play. You frown and understand. You're about to participate in one of those staged gladiator fights. So real, everyone thinks it's not. The Romans loved their arena, but they loved a good story even more. And sometimes, to keep the crowds entertained, organizers staged scripted matches with fixed outcomes. Who wins? Who falls? Who gasps at what moment? It was all planned. What you're about to enter is a play, just with more sweat, more dust, and sand flying everywhere. The rehearsal takes place in a quiet, hidden corner. You and your opponent are trained to strike, fall, and yell with just the right level of drama without looking ridiculous. The director reminds you, don't spin 3 times like last time. People thought you actually got dizzy. Today's story, you're the hero from the north. He's the traitor who fled the legion. You're to battle fiercely for 5 minutes. Then you barely win and choose to spare him. A humane ending meant to stir the crowd's hearts. You think sounds easy. Much easier than a real fight until you step into the arena and realize that even fake falls hurt just as much. Your opponent forgets to jump far enough. You land right on his knee. Sand flies up your nose. The crowd roars with delight, so realistic. Someone drops their wine in awe. Someone wipes away tears. Someone shouts, "He spared him." A true warrior. Meanwhile, you're just trying to breathe correctly again. Not every match goes smoothly. One time, the actors messed up the sequence. The guy who was killed stood up before the victor even raised his arms. The crowd blinked in confusion. A child yelled, "Wait, isn't he supposed to be dead?" Organizers rushed in, clapped backs, and said, "Unforeseen circumstances." Another time, the one playing the defeated role fell too hard and broke his arm. The match was stopped. Whispers spread. What if those other fights weren't real either? The organizers denied it, of course, but deep down they knew. The line between acting and real fighting is thin as a blad's edge. Still, no one can deny that these intentional performances have given rise to some of the most memorable moments. Once a pair of gladiator lovers were cast in a special scene. They played two souls forced to fight each other. At the final moment, they both threw down their weapons and embraced, waiting to be sentenced. The audience stood and clapped. The emperor reportedly shed a tear. The couple was pardoned and married for real. Some performances were tragic. An old gladiator falls. The young opponent raises his sword, but remembers an old debt and drops the blade. The crowd goes silent, then bursts into thunderous applause. It may be theater, but the emotion's still real. You walk off the sand after your first fake match, your knees scraped. Your shoulder aches from a poorly timed tumble. But your heart feels light. No one died. No one was unjustly punished. No one limped away in shame. Just a story told with dust, sweat, and cheers. And you were part of it. And you lying there tonight don't have to perform anything. No one's waiting for you to hit your cue. No one needs you to win or fall perfectly. There's no script, no director, just your breath, your gentle heartbeat, and a story slowly fading away, like soft sand covering every scratch. You're tidying up gear in a quiet corner backstage when you spot an old notebook wedged between broken armor pieces. Curious, you open it. The first line reads, "A list of matches best left unmentioned." You chuckle. It's likely just a joke, but as you flip through the pages, you see detailed notes. Mass slip incident. November 6th, mistaken gate opening. Guard fell asleep mid-arena, and match where gladiator played dead too early. In the grand history of the Roman arena, some matches were remembered not for glory, but for being too ridiculous, flawed, or strange ever to be spoken of again. There was one match where two gladiators entered with full bravado, flags waving, drums pounding, but both thought the fight was staged. So they stood still, each waiting for the other to make the first move. 1 minute, then 2, then 5. The audience started whispering. Someone asked, "Are they having a patience contest?" Finally, the match official shouted, "Just start already." Both gladiators flinched and swung at the same time, hitting each other. Not hard, but awkward. One fell at the wrong angle. The other tried to help, but dropped his helmet. The match was paused. Note: quietest match of all time. Then there was the sunny day when guards were handed water mixed with too much wine. One of them dozed off right in the best tunnel. When the gate opened, the leopard trotted out, saw the snoring guard, and turned right back around. The crowd thought it was part of the show. Cheers erupted. The guard only woke up when doused with water. First words, "I dreamt I was emperor." The match was recorded as leopard avoids snore. Another match had no one at all. Someone had miswritten the schedule. The gladiators were called for the afternoon. The audience arrived in the morning. Drums rolled, flags waved. Everything was ready except no one came through the gate. The match official broke into a sweat trying to explain. Some booed, some laughed. A small child shouted, "I want to go home." Organizers sent the cleanup crew into the arena to salvage the moment. Posing as gladiators, they wielded brooms as swords, trash can lids as shields. That impromptu battle became the most talked about event. Some of these matches were never formally archived, but everyone who witnessed them remembered. Like the time a gladiator entered through the wrong tunnel. It was meant to be a tag team match, but he emerged from the enemy gate. When his actual partner lunged at him, he shouted, "Wait, same team." They both collapsed, laughing. Match cancelled. Note, prop error. Why weren't these matches mentioned? Maybe out of embarrassment. Maybe to preserve the dignity of the games. Or maybe because even the Romans had their pride, and they knew not everything needed to be remembered, especially when it made the backstage crew want to hide under their tunics. But for you, reading these notes is comforting because you realize there were moments of total harmless chaos. Even in the strictest, fiercest place like the Colosseum, things didn't always go to plan. And that's okay. Tonight you don't need to get everything right either. If today you forgot something, said the wrong words, took the wrong turn, or were simply tired, know that somewhere in history there's an entire notebook devoted to days like that, and no one erased it. They just quietly tucked it into a drawer. Sometimes they take it out, smile softly, and fall asleep in peace. This morning, the heavy wooden gates of the Colosseum opened earlier than usual. No drums, no flags, no roar of the crowd. No one waits with a sword in hand. Today there is no match. Today it's just you standing alone in the arena. Not to fight, but to remember. You stroll across the soft sand. Faint footprints still mark the ground. Someone once ran here, fell here, got back up here. You crouch down and pick up a broken strap, maybe dropped during yesterday's fight. A breeze drifts by, carrying the fading echo of long silenced cheers. You glance up at the stands. The stone seats are empty now, but you still remember the sounds, every shout, every applause, every disappointed sigh from people who didn't just come for blood, but came to forget their sadness for a while, and once you were one of them. There were days you stepped into the arena with fear tightening your chest. Days you fell right after the first lunge. Days you laughed while being chased in circles by a goose. You faked a victory. You sang until your voice cracked. You stood still in the rain doing nothing at all of it. The good, the bad, the ridiculous. It was all part of your time in the arena. Not to prove you were the best, but to prove you were brave enough to show up. You don't remember the names of everyone you met, but you remember how it felt when a teammate fell and you turned back to help. When you and your opponent burst out laughing after slipping simultaneously. When you were spared. Not because you fought well, but because you raised your head at just the right moment. And you remember the audience who clapped. Not because you won, but because you stood there while shaking. Because you nodded even in defeat. Because you smiled while sweat stung your eyes. You were never a legendary gladiator. But you survived. You showed up. You didn't walk away. And sometimes in this world, that's enough. You stand once more at the heart of the arena. A gentle breeze. The sun was beginning to peek over the stone arches. No one calls your name. No one waits for your bow. But still, you bow as a quiet farewell to everything that's past. This strange arena where the battles weren't always fair. Where people laughed, cried, fell, and got up again. Where you once felt lost. Once I felt afraid. Once laughed with a crowd cheering all around you. A place that, strangely enough, helped you understand yourself better. You walk through the grand stone gates. No sword in hand, no shield, no title, just you. Shoulders lighter, heartbeat steady. Outside, Rome hums as it always has. The clatter of carts, street vendors are shouting, the scent of ripe grapes mixed with the dust of the road. People go about their day. No one knows you've just closed a long chapter of your life, but you do. And that's what matters most. Tonight, you are no longer a gladiator in a dream. No more sand, no drums, no grandstands. Just you in the quiet with steady breaths, with sleep gently wrapping around you like a soft cloak. You've walked the whole story. Every part is a grain of sand, a burst of laughter, a drop of sweat. And now you can set it all down behind you. You don't have to remember every detail. Just hold on to one truth. You survived and you deserve to rest. Thank you for staying until the very end.